So this video here is going to cover how we create frequency tables, relative frequencies, and how to present our qualitative data. So when we talk about qualitative data, we're talking about the data that you see on this Excel spreadsheet that deal with characteristics. Normally, 99% of the time, you're going to deal with qualitative data being words. And then our quantitative data would be our numbers, which is covered in chapter 1 or section 1. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look strictly at our qualitative data, how to create frequency tables, and how we present that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at location. And what we're going to do is we're going to create actually what's known as a pivot table. And the pivot table is what's going to represent our frequency table. And we know that frequency tables represent a count of how many times um, these pieces of data repeat themselves. So when we look at location, we're going to look at how many times a car was sold at Tionesta, Sheffield, Kane, and Olean. So to get started, we're going to go up here and do insert and create a pivot table. Now what you're going to see is it actually highlights all of the data that we have. You can highlight specifically what you want to deal with, but in order to manipulate all of the data, we can actually just keep it all highlighted. So I'm going to keep it all highlighted. And then I'm going to come down here where it says choose where you want your pivot table to be placed. I'm actually going to do it on the existing and not a new, so you can actually see the data and the pivot table at the same time. But once I do that, I have to click in this location area, and I'm going to slide this over, and I'm going to put it here in cell G2 and click OK. So this should pop up, which is the starting point, the drop value fields. So when we come to the right, this is where we're actually going to kind of manipulate our data. So as I mentioned before, we want to look at location and the count of how many times cars, that's what this is, it's representing a car dealership. The age of the people that bought a car, the profit from selling the car, the location the car was bought, the vehicle type, and then how many cars were previously bought by that individual from those dealerships. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on location over here, and what should happen is down here in the bottom right where you see the rows, location should pop down there. If it doesn't, you can simply left click on the location, pull it down and drop it into that rows, and then the same thing, as you can see, what happened is that we now have location, and we have the locations here, all of the locations that actually exist in our data, and then we have this grand total. So next what we want to do is we actually want to do the frequency part of it, or the count. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull this locations, once again left click on it, drag it down to the values field and drop it in. So what you should see, sometimes you'll see it'll say a sum of. What we want is a count of. So if it does pop up where when you pull it down it says sum of, what you want to do is you want to click on this drop down, go to the value field setting, and where we see here in the middle of the screen it says sum, count, average. We actually want it to be on count because that's what a frequency table represents. So I'm going to click OK, and then here we have our count. So this is technically a frequency table. We know that 52 cars were bought at Kane, 40 were bought at Olean, at Sheffield 45 were purchased, and at Tionesta 43, which is a total of 180 cars purchased. So once again, this is representing a frequency table for qualitative data. So the next thing we want to do is we can actually take a look at this as well as a relative frequencies or a percent. So what percent of the time, or what percent of the cars were purchased at Kane, what percent were bought at Olean, Sheffield, and Tionesta. Now normally what we would do is to create a frequency table, we would take the number of occurrences divided by how many total occurrences. So 52 cars bought at Kane divided by 180 to get the relative frequency. Excel actually expedites that process for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull the location down again to my value fields, and it's going to repeat the count. So you actually see the same thing you saw previously, but what we want to do is we want to convert this into percents. So as we did, as I showed you earlier, if you click on that drop down box and click on value field setting, you're going to see once again where it says sum count. We want to leave it at a count, but what we want to do is we want to go to this show value fields tab, click on that, and where it says no calculation, we want to go ahead and drop down that and go to percent of grand total. And I'm going to click OK here, and now you notice we have our relative frequencies. So the percentage of the time that cars were purchased in those locations. So this is how we create a frequency table and convert those into relative frequencies. Once again, Excel is so much faster than any other process. So I highly recommend that you're using Excel to do your problems and to do your work. Now, the last part of this that I want to talk about is how we create the presentation portion of it. Statistics is the collecting, organizing, interpreting, and then obviously the presenting of data. So the presenting part with qualitative data, when we're dealing with frequencies, we're actually just going to represent that using a bar chart. So in order to create a bar chart, I'm going to go back to the Insert tab. I'm going to go to my charts here, and you have a drop down arrow, and I'm just going to click on the first one, and here's what we have for our drop down, for our chart. So what I can do is actually, to make this just a little bit more legible, if you take a look at this, it says cane, and we know it's above 50, but in order to make this a lot easier to read, I'm going to click on it and then right click and do add data labels, and this will give me my count of how many times those occur. So this is something that you can do later on, but it does help with the representation when presenting, so people aren't guessing the outcomes or the amounts. Okay. Now I'm going to delete this, and then I'm going to show you how we represent that as well as a relative frequencies. So with qualitative data with frequency tables or counts, we want to use bar charts. With our relative frequencies, we actually want to use pie charts because it's representing a whole and we're dealing with percentages. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go do the same thing I did previously, go to the Insert tab, but instead of going to the bar, I'm going to go to the pie chart here, and I'm just going to select this first one. You can get a little bit fancier if you want to practice, but I'm just going with simple basics. So we have this here, this pie chart, but if you take a look at it, once again, they all kind of look the same in the portion, in terms of the portion of the pie that they represent. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to right click on this, and I'm going to add those data labels again. Now this is where we get kind of confused here, because when we added those, if you notice, instead of giving us the percents, it's giving us the count. So what I want to do is I actually want to convert those into percentages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to left click on those, so we have these boxes that pop up, and I'm going to right click now, and what I want to do is I want to format these data labels. And what you see is this format data labels pop up over here, and what you notice, it says values percents. So I'm actually going to click off of the values, and I'm going to add the percents here, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this now, and now I have, and you can move these around, you know, once you have, if you want to edit, but normally you can just leave them as is, just to help make sense. So so this is how you create, once again, this is how you're creating, you're using pivot tables to represent your frequency tables for your qualitative data. If you guys have any questions about how to do this, please feel free to reach out to me through email, but this is how we would actually use our frequency tables and relative frequencies and present or summarize our qualitative data. And thank you.